We are returning to our occasional series based on the stories of Genesis. We are reading the Bible again for the first time, and we are searching for metaphysical meanings, personal meanings. We know that it is no longer adequate to simply believe these stories are historically accurate or they are literally true. We have to dig deeper. We have to dig deeper to reveal the helpful, practical messages that resonate with our lives today. We have to become more comfortable using words like allegory, metaphor, myth, poetry, legend. And we have to understand that these stories have meanings for our lives and for our world today. These stories reveal our psychological makeup, our relationship with others. These stories can assist in our journey through life. And we've been taking a break for a while, but about 2 months ago we started the story of Joseph and his brothers. We saw how the family dynamics depicted in the Joseph story could relate to our family dynamics. We could relate these family dynamics to our interactions with our human family, our birth family, and our families of choice, our co-workers, and all of the others in our life and world. We've seen how the people in our lives are mirrors. They are reflections of our own consciousness. They are parts of us. The cycle of stories about Joseph is the longest in the whole book of Genesis. And it's been 2 months since we've started. I wanted to recap the story so far. You remember those old serial the story so far. Yeah. Joseph is a dreamer. And we discussed how Joseph represents our power, our faculty of imagination. Our faculty of imagination is the most marvelous, miraculous, inconceivably powerful force in the world that the world has ever known. But at the beginning of the story, Joseph's power of imagination is undisciplined. Joseph has dreams of somehow ruling his brothers. But Joseph displays very poor judgment and a lack of discipline because instead of keeping his big mouth shut, he tells his brothers about these dreams, and that makes them so resentful that they attack Joseph and sell him into slavery in Egypt. Now, Egypt can represent a great many things. Egypt can represent material wealth, prosperity, abundance. But Egypt can also represent the slavery of sense consciousness. I like to think of this, I didn't write this part down, but have you ever heard of somebody being a wage slave, just feeling bound to a job that they hate? Sense consciousness is the erroneous belief that we are bound to our earthly needs, our situations and circumstances. Sense consciousness is why we feel sometimes trapped by outer conditions. We stay in relationships that aren't good to us or good for us. We stay in jobs that seem to suck the life out of us. In her Unity Classic book, Lessons in Truth, Dr. Emily Cady calls this sense consciousness. She calls this bondage to the flesh. And she says that all suffering is the result of this belief. Joseph is first sold to a man named Potiphar. Joseph becomes a slave or a kind of indentured servant. But in Genesis 39, verse 2, it says that the Lord was with Joseph. That inner presence, that calling of spirit was with Joseph. Even as a servant, Joseph becomes a successful man. We discussed how it does not matter what situation or circumstance we find ourselves in. We will prosper when we allow ourselves to be led and guided. When we say yes and follow that guidance, abundance and prosperity, well, it may not look like what we think it should look like or what we expect. We may have a lot of work to do, but we will prosper. Potiphar sees how intelligent and hard-working Joseph is, and Potiphar puts Joseph in charge of his household, everything that he has. On the other hand, Potiphar's wife makes a play for Joseph. She tries to seduce him. But Joseph uses that marvelous power of imagination to play the tape forward, and he knows that bad things will happen if he sleeps with Potiphar's wife. So Joseph refuses. Potiphar's wife then turns the whole thing around and accuses Joseph, and Potiphar throws Joseph in jail. We left off the story, the Joseph cycle of stories here, about 2 months ago with Joseph in prison. But even in prison, Joseph follows his guidance, the guidance of God's presence within him, and he finds favor with the jailkeeper. Joseph becomes a kind of a trustee in charge of the other prisoners. Genesis 39:23 says, "The prison keeper paid no heed to anything in Joseph's care because the Lord was with him. Whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper." Again, it does not matter what situation or what circumstance we find ourselves in. When we are led, when we are guided, and when we say yes to that guidance, we will prosper. So Joseph is in prison, and he's there with 2 other prisoners with him. One is the chief cupbearer for Pharaoh, and the other is the chief baker. Now Pharaoh is angry with them both, and they both ended up in prison there with Joseph. The cupbearer and the baker each have dreams that they can't understand. They can't figure out what these dreams mean. And so they ask Joseph. Now, dream interpretation and Bible interpretation have many similarities. First, the dream is always about the dreamer. The various elements, the various components of a dream are parts of our own subconscious mind. They are our fears, they're our anxieties, our goals, our ambitions, and the obstacles that we perceive in attaining those goals. Bible interpretation begins with the understanding that the characters and the events of the story are parts of our consciousness. There is no one correct interpretation. How we interpret Bible stories tell us about us. There is no wrong interpretation. Only what works. Only what is functional and helpful in our lives. For example, in Unity's metaphysical Bible interpretation, Jesus represents the indwelling Christ. Now, if you have an interpretation that works better for you, so be it. The crucial factor is that the interpretation is functional does the interpretation work in your life, in your world, in your experience? So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream and said, this is Genesis 40, verse 9. In my dream, this is the cupbearer speaking, in my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. And as soon as the vine budded, its blossoms came out, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I pressed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup, and I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And then Joseph tells the cupbearer, this is your dream's interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place the cup in Pharaoh's hand again. But remember me when it is all well with you. Do me the kindness and mention me to Pharaoh. Get me out of this place. When the chief baker saw that the cupbearer's interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the top basket there were all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating out of the basket on my head. Joseph answered, this is your dream's interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you. And your head will be stuck on a pole, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Now, Pharaoh's birthday was 3 days later, and he made a feast for all of his servants, and he pardoned the cupbearer. But the Pharaoh ordered the baker's execution. Pharaoh restored the cupbearer to his office, but he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted. Yet the cupbearer did not remember Joseph, and he did not mention him to Pharaoh. You ever done somebody a favor? They say they're going to pay you back, but they never do. Remember that your good is not dependent on what others do or don't do. God's presence within you is the source of all of your good, and it is better to give with no strings attached. Go ahead, do that favor, but don't expect the favor in return, because the channel you give to may not be the same channel you receive through. Your good is not limited to the channels that you have given to. So Joseph is still in jail. But after 2 whole years, Pharaoh starts having dreams. Pharaoh dreamt that he was standing by the Nile, and 7 sleek and fat cows came up out of the river. Then Pharaoh saw 7 other cows, ugly and thin, and the ugly and thin cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Pharaoh then had a second dream, where there were 7 ears of grain, plump and good. They were all growing on one stalk. And then he saw 7 thin and scrawny ears of grain, and the thin and scrawny ears swallowed up the plump and full ears. Pharaoh calls for all of the magicians, all of the wise men in Egypt, but no one can interpret these dreams. Suddenly, the cupbearer remembers Joseph, and he tells Pharaoh, who sends for Joseph. Pharaoh tells Joseph his dreams, and Joseph interprets them. Joseph tells Pharaoh that both dreams are about the same thing. The 7 cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of grain are 7 years. The dreams are one. There will be 7 good years of bountiful harvest, and Egypt will produce more grain than it could possibly use. But as soon as the good years are over, there will be 7 years of famine. Joseph says that Egypt will forget the years of plenty because the famine will consume the land. He says that because there were 2 dreams about the same thing, that means that God has fixed it. It will happen. Sometimes, when experiences in our lives keep repeating, when we find ourselves in the same situations over and over again, well, it might be time to do something about that. Why do I keep getting involved with the same kind of people? Why am I going through this again? When something keeps repeating in our lives, there is a message in it for us. And it's right there on the surface of our consciousness. And the message is that it might be time to make some different choices. Joseph tells Pharaoh to store up grain during the good years so that Egypt will be ready when the famine hits. He tells Pharaoh, well, it's going to be a big job. So, Pharaoh, you know what you should do? You should pick someone wise to run the whole program. Now, Pharaoh thinks that this is a pretty good idea. And guess who Pharaoh picks to run the operation? Pharaoh picks Joseph. And immediately Joseph ascends to the highest position in Pharaoh's court. Joseph is now second only to Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh gives Joseph the signet ring from his hand, which means that Joseph can act with Pharaoh's authority. Now, we all have dreams. There are things we want to do. There are things we want to be and to have. We want to learn. We want to contribute. We want to grow and experience. There are places we want to go and things we want to do. And our power of imagination will show us the desires of our hearts. Do not let your earthly situations or circumstances stand in your way. Allow yourself to be led and guided. Say yes and follow that guidance. Be a dreamer of dreams, and then make your dreams come true. God bless you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is our opportunity, yours and mine, to pour out the gift of God from within us through our tithes and our love offerings. And can we share our offertory blessing together? Divine love flowing through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. I am joy-filled and grateful. Thank you, God. And you can send your gifts, your tithes, your love offerings to paypal.me/UnityLincoln. That's paypal.me/UnityLincoln. And you can also send your gifts through the mail or through a bank transfer by sending them to Unity Lincoln, P.O. Box 30209, Lincoln, Nebraska 68503. Or you can go to our webpage at unitylincoln.org, and there you will find a convenient link to donate via PayPal. You can also help support Unity Lincoln by liking us on Facebook and subscribing on YouTube. And you can be God-given, no matter how you try. And just as sure as you are living, and the Christ is deep inside. The more you give, the more God gives to you. But keep on giving, because it's really true that you can be God-given, no matter how you try. And let us share this affirmation for our church family. Together, Unity Lincoln is blessed to draw the people, funds, and all that is required for the health and growth of our community and peace in the world, heart to heart. And our heat pump drive is going along swimmingly. We've raised over